I'm going to show how to make this black felt effect using Affinity Photo's Procedural Texture Filter. I was watching a video and this background was used for some text and just flashed on the screen for about 2 seconds, but I thought that looks really interesting. I wonder if I could make that using a procedural texture. And so I started messing around with it, and as I looked at it, I saw more and more details. So there's several layers here. First thing that seemed most obvious to me were these vertical lines, and it looked almost like a fabric. And so I started doing these vertical lines, and then I had a little bit of a noise to the vertical lines. And then it also had these sort of smudges in the background. So I used Perlin noise to create those. And then as I was working with it, I noticed every once in a while it had sort of a horizontal line. So I added those in, and I had it generate those randomly. It looked sort of like someone had written on this with chalk. I actually drew on a chalkboard and took some samples of that and sort of mixed those in at random to get the overall effect. I'm going to show how to make this background using the procedural textures. Start with a new document, 1024 by 768. Make sure it's set to RGB, and I'm just going to leave it rectangular like this. Create that. I'm going to fill it with a black background, like that, and add a procedural texture. Add a single equation and a single custom input. I'll call this one scale. Set it to 1. In this one I'm just going to start with my coordinate system, so it'll be a variable v equals vec2 rx comma ry times a divided by w. Assign it to all 3 channels. I'm going to start with a single oscillator of v dot x. I want this to have a fairly high frequency, so I'm going to multiply by 10. Okay, so there's my basic pattern. I'm going to increase this up to about maybe 18 to get started. The other thing I did was I took a sample of the original image and used that as a reference. I pasted a little corner of that in here as a reference. So I'm going to do that with this one. I've selected part of this. I'm going to copy that with a Control-C and paste it in over here with a Control-V. So that's what I'm targeting. This is what I've got so far. Right now so the first thing I notice is the stripes on this are a little bit too narrow, so I'm going to bring these down and see if I can match them up a little bit. So that looks pretty good. Don't have to be perfect. I'm going to add a scaling factor from 0 to 1. I'll call it I, and I'm going to use this to scale the vertical stripes so that they are at about the same tone values as this one. I might also need to add in a offset at this point, so I'll just put it in now, and I'll call this one vertical and this one offset. I'll multiply this by I, and then I'll add the offset to it. Now when I bring this down, I can get it nice and dark, and then I can bring this over to get just the right value for these. One trick I can do to try to make sure I have exactly the right value, if I choose this one and set it to darken, then as I bring this down, I can sort of see when they're at about the right value. Just going to leave it like that for now though. Next thing I wanted to do, if I look at this pattern, it is a linear effect with just a regular oscillator. There's an oscillator that has sort of this rounded waveform like this. It's sort of pointed at the bottom. That is the SQ oscillator. So I'm going to use that one. I'm going to change this to oscsq. There's two forms of this, and so if I look at this, that is the wrong form. I need the one, the opposite of that is called sqi. This is sort of this nice corduroy-like effect, and that's what I'm looking for here. Next thing I want to do is I want to add a little bit of noise to this one, so I'm going to add some noise. I want the noise to go in both directions, so I'm going to choose noiseh, and I'll just start out by making that just a V, and that is way too much. So I'm going to add a multiplier times the scale to bring up the scale of this, and so I'll have B times that. I'll just add another custom real input for that, and I'm going to make that like that. And I also need to adjust the size of the noise, the intensity of the noise. So I'll add another 0 to 1 slider for that. We'll call it I1. I'll label this noise scale, and this one noise intensity. I'll multiply this by I1, and I'm going to bring that way down. Now it looks pretty good like that already. I'm going to add a little bit of stretching to this. So I'm going to add a stretching vector up here, and that's just going to be another variable, sv equals norm of vec2 of 1 comma xy, and then a couple of parentheses to finish that off. And then I can add my real xy vector down here, and I'll just call that noise stretch. I'm just going to put that at 2 for now, and I'm going to multiply my this by that stretching vector times sv. So that stretches it out and pretty much does what I want it to do. I'm going to make and scale this up by a factor of 10 because I want it to be pretty small. So I'm going to not only multiply by b, but also multiply by 10. So that's probably smaller than I want it. And so I'm just going to bring this down now until I get it about the size I want it, like that. I'll just leave it like that for now. So that's the first part. I can adjust this now. I'm going to bring it back down until it's about the same intensity as that one. I think I want to bring vertical line intensity down a little bit. This vertical intensity is getting pretty close to the end, so I'm going to actually divide that by 5. And this offset, I'm working very close to the center point here. I'm going to divide that by 5. So I have a little bit better range for these. So now I can bring this one up about here and then adjust this one to match. So I'm going to bring this down a little like that. All right, that's not too bad. And then I could match it up pretty closely. All right, I'm going to bring this back up so it's a little easier to see though for now. The next thing I'm going to do is I want to add sort of this overall noise effect in the background. So I'm going to use Perlin noise for that. And since I'm using Perlin noise, I'm going to add an O for octaves. And I'll set that up to 10. And then I'm going to add a slider 0 to 1, input S for the smoothness factor, and just set that to about halfway. When I introduce the Perlin noise, I'm going to put it inside of a maximum function so that some places the Perlin noise will be the brightest object, so then that will sort of smudge that area out. In other places this fabric will be brightest. I thought that would maybe work the best. So I'm going to put in a max, and I'm going to leave this oscillator the same in there. Now I'm going to add perlincubic V, O, and S. And I have to close parentheses for the maximum. So there's a perlincubic. Now I need to scale that, so I'm going to multiply it by a factor of I2. I2 is Perlin intensity. Now I can bring that down and just bring that in like that. It might be nice to scale this differently, and I'd like it to have a smaller size than the others. I'm just going to put in a variable c here, and I'll call that Perlin scale. And for this one, I'm actually going to divide by c. So I'm going to take the coordinates and divide by c, like that. And the Perlin intensity is pretty close to the end here. And I like to have a little bit more control over that, so I'm going to divide this one by 10. So now it doesn't really start showing up until I get out there, but I want to have very fine control on that. This is what the formula looks like so far. I've got a normalized vector for scaling the noise. I've got a coordinate vector scaled by a and w. I've got my max function. Inside it I've got my oscillator, and it's just a v dot x, so it's only making vertical stripes. And I've got my perlincubic, and then I've got an offset, and then I've got the noise. Okay, I can bring this down to adjust it to be about the right intensity. So I like that so far. Now the other thing I noticed was every once in a while there were these horizontal lines. So I'm going to add those in, and I'm going to put them inside of the maximum function. So I add another comma, and then I'm going to put in another oscillator, oscsqi, so the same type of oscillator, and this time it's going to be v dot y, and I want to scale it by the same amount, 10. So I'm going to have 10 times v dot y, and I need to scale this by a intensity control, and I'll use I3 divided by 5. I need to add my intensity control down here, and this will be for the horizontal. I don't want it to be so dominant, so I'm going to multiply it by a random number variable with the same scale. So I'm going to multiply this by noiseh, so it goes both directions, sc 10 times v dot y. I'm going to bring this up, and so you can see every once in a while it has this horizontal stripe, but most of the time you just see the vertical stripes. I'm going to bring this down until it's just showing through once in a while, about like that. So in that case, I've added this new function, I3 over 5 times oscsqi 10 times v dot y times noisehsc 10 times v dot y. So that's all I have for that part. The last bit, I actually have a chalkboard at my house, and I made some marks, some random marks on the chalkboard. I'm going to open up that. I'm just going to grab some of these random smudges from this chalkboard and bring them into my other picture. I'm going to choose the selection brush. I'm just going to highlight something like that. I'm going to hit Control C and Control V. And so it made a copy of this. I'm going to hit Control D to deselect it, and then select the background again. So if I don't do that, it won't really make a copy of the new one. Now I'll just choose another little smudge here. Control C, Control V, Control D to deselect it, choose the background again. They work better if they have higher contrast, like these over here on the edge. I'm going to select all these, I'm going to copy them and paste them into my other document. Now I'm going to choose these one at a time and sort of just randomize the position of it, orientation of it. And so they look a little more random. If you don't have a blackboard, you could probably use chalk on a black paper to do something similar. When I have these arranged how I want them, I'm going to group them all. And then I'm going to apply procedural texture filter to these. I'm just going to add an equation, assign it to all 3 channels. I'm going to use a vec3 of r, comma, capital R, capital G, capital B, and I'm going to multiply that by I times 2, and I'm going to add an offset, OF, and I'm also going to make multiply that one by 2. So I can sort of increase the intensity of these. And I'm going to add an offset that'll go from -1 to 1. I'll call that OF. Like that. So now I can decrease the intensity or increase or decrease the offset like this. For this group, I'm going to change it to lighten. And so if these are ever lighter, it'll come through. And then I'm going to look at some of these, like this one sort of dominant, and I'm just going to tweak that a little bit. It seems to blend a little better with the background. Something like that. And then I could also maybe just make this 50%, just so it's sort of subtle marks every once in a while. I'm going to add some text to this now and make it nice and small. Make it white. And for the font, I'm going to use this Acrylic 2. And I'm going to add a live filter, a little bit of a displace filter to this. Load from layers underneath. Maybe not quite so much. I'm going to take this down to about a 75%. So that's the effect I was trying to duplicate. Next time you're thinking of using a plain black background, consider this black felt effect instead. Let me know if you have any comments or questions, and thanks for watching.